Let's play a game. Tonight's set of stories is different. There will be 3 allegedly true tales, while one in the bunch is actually a creepypasta, a short work of fiction. Can you guess which one? Have you ever wanted to visit the sketchiest place on the internet without the dangers of going into the deep web? Well, say no more. Craigslist has you covered. Now you can buy fake things from creepy strangers, get mugged by a gang, or possibly get murdered, just because you wanted that new graphics card at half the price. Nice. Yes, Craigslist is a great place to save money and get in touch with people. But by God, be careful. There are terrible, terrible people out there that use it as a tool to get to you. So, you might want to rethink calling that guy about his used car. Also, props to Kingspook, Shivers, and Mortis Media for their narrations. Are you ready? Number 1. I bought a soul on Craigslist. By Didn't Check Source. Read by Darkness Prevails. I'm a 24-year-old ginger male. In high school, I was the only redhead in my little Missouri town. I had long, curly hair. I was fat and awkward. My braced teeth were still very crooked, and I hated myself. Nobody really liked me. While most people limit themselves to not talking to me, I had 2 actual bullies who would steal my lunch money and make a mockery of everything that I did. Of course, these kids were popular and had good grades and generally good interactions with everybody else, as far as I know. So it was very hard to convince teachers that they were doing me harm. And they got away without ever facing serious consequences. I was frequently told that I had to stand up to them, but how could I? Anyway, since this is relevant, let's pretend that the first was called John and the other Dave. Thankfully, being a nerd paid off, and I'm now employed at a tech company in Seattle, earning a 6-figure salary. Also, I'm not fat anymore and nowhere nearly as awkward. South Park had aired the Ginger Kids episode on November 9th of 2005. I remember it very well because that triggered a series of bullying episodes. Several people had seen the show and started saying that I had no soul and that I shouldn't be allowed to eat in the cafeteria. Then, several more people who probably hadn't seen the show but who thought they were funny started piling more crap on me. This theme lasted for a few weeks. I won't elaborate too much because I don't like to remind myself of that part of my life. Still, to this day, people joke that I have no soul every once in a while. Most of them don't mean any harm though. I can't say that I like it. The last instance of that came up about 2 weeks ago, when a friend posted a link to a Craigslist ad on my Facebook wall. He wrote, "You should get that," and the ad was about a soul for sale in the Seattle area. The description read along the lines of soul in a bottle for sale, asking $20. At first, I rolled my eyes and dismissed it, but then it occurred to me that this might be an occasion to take control of the narrative. If somebody joked that I didn't have a soul, I could joke back that I bought one off Craigslist. At the very least, that would make a funny story to tell around drinks the next time I hang out with the guy. So I thought, what the hell, might as well. I can afford to spend more money on dumber things, so I called the guy and told him that I was interested. The seller lived in an unfavored neighborhood north of Seattle. If I hadn't seen the television playing through the window, I could have sworn that it was abandoned. The lawn was gravelly unkempt. As I walked closer to the front door, I spotted compressed gas cylinders lying around under the front patio, and I wondered what that was doing here. It kind of smelled like cat pee, too. I didn't feel very safe. I've heard a ton of stories of guys getting mugged or killed during Craigslist transactions, and I realized that I was in the perfect spot for this. The conscious part of me was thinking that I should never have been there in the first place. The unconscious part of me, for an inexplicable reason, decided to knock on the door at the same time. I kind of froze there and wondered what the fuck I had just done. I decided if nobody answered within 30 seconds, I'd just go home. No more than 10 seconds later, though, I decided that 10 seconds was actually enough, and I turned back to my car. But just as I was getting into the driver's seat, I noticed a black man running down the street. He waved frantically his hand to catch my attention, and I noticed that he was holding a small Mason-style jar. So he caught up to me and caught his breath. then asked me if I didn't check source from Craigslist. The following is super weird, and I think that the guy had mental issues. He talked more than I'm reporting, but it sounded like a word salad to me. I thought I was good at remembering discussions, but I figure that I'm actually only good at remembering meanings, and I couldn't really find a meaning in this discussion. So I don't remember it very well, but basically, here's what happened. I said yes, didn't check source, and he said something like, "Oh, that's great." I asked him if he lived there, and told me that no, he just thought it was a safer place to meet. He headed for the passenger seat and tried to open the door, which was locked. He knocked on the window, like he wanted me to open the passenger side door, and I let him know that this wasn't going to happen. He asked me if I wanted him to drive instead, and I told him that this was definitely not going to happen. He looked confused and told me that he needed to get to downtown Seattle. I told him that this wasn't in the ad, and he never told me that, but that I would call him a taxi and he could go with the money that I was about to pay for the item. But that just made him upset. He told me that he needed the ride and the money. I told him that the deal was off and started the engine. He angrily looked at me, sent me the finger, and threw the jar in the lawn. Then he walked away, occasionally turning back to yell, "Fuck you." I was scared, but for some reason, I didn't leave right away. Instead, when I couldn't see him anymore, I got out of my car, walked over to the spot where he had thrown the jar, and I picked it up. It wasn't broken, and it looked just like a small, mundane, empty, sealed mason jar. The absurdity of the situation hit me while I was inspecting it. I put myself in danger just to get an empty bottle, and it's not like you could put fairies in them in real life that would heal you when you were about to die. I still took it with me and got back to my car. As I looked back, I swear that I saw a figure in the house where I had knocked. While I was driving, I was becoming more and more aware of how careless I had been. The paranoia made me feel like I was being watched all the way home. No one was following me, but it just felt like there was something out there. When I finally got there, I popped a beer open to relax. I still couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being watched. I put the jar on my kitchen countertop and took a photo of it. I posted it in reply to my friend's wall post and wrote, "I nearly died to get this." After posting the photo and looking at it closer, I found that the flash made a reflection that looked like a tiny face on the bottle and thought that it was kind of funny in a weird way. Over the next few days, I proudly declared to my friends that I had a soul now and showed off the little jar. I told them that it couldn't be opened or the soul would become free. While I couldn't erase the uneasy feelings surrounding the circumstances of how I got it, I did get a kick from telling the story, and people thought that me having a soul in a jar was actually pretty funny. So, mission accomplished, I guess. I kept the jar in my room. At some point during the week, as I was arguing with strangers on the internet, some thought crossed my mind, and that thought was literally just, "Hey." I find that my brain can express ideas much faster than language. For instance, when I think about a concept, it's like the whole thought already exists in my brain, and that the thought is then translated into English thoughts that are echoed back in my mind at a slower pace. Even though I spin up a whole sentence to describe an idea, that idea existed beforehand and didn't really need to be translated. Maybe you felt that, or are aware of it too. It's kind of hard to explain. Well, that "hey" thought crossed my mind as one of these basic thoughts, and it was super strange because it felt like it didn't come from me. It's not like hearing a voice, but I'm going to admit that the effect is similar. I wondered if I was crazy and paused for a moment, and I felt another "hey" going through my mind. I looked at the bottle, and then a much more complex idea flashed in my mind. "You said you could free me if you opened the bottle. Is that true?" I was very surprised and didn't know what to think, answer. For a few seconds, and keep in mind that I'm not hearing this, it's just flashing through my brain as some definitive, unambiguous idea that is not bound by language and that I'm just poorly transcribing here. The voice continued. "If you free me, I'll punish, seek retribution from your bullies from high school. I'll right the wrongs." I definitely thought that I was crazy. Was this bottle actually talking to me? In my head, the voice had completely stopped. I wasn't sure what to do, so I took the jar and slowly unscrewed the lid. As it was opening, there was the same kind of psst that's there when you open a soda bottle, except that it lasted much longer. probably over 15 seconds actually, and then nothing. I completely undid the lid anyway, but absolutely nothing else happened. I woke up one morning just a few days later to find that John had died in the freakiest accident. Apparently he would sleepwalk once in a while, and that night, around 2 in the morning, he found himself just outside his apartment in boxers. He lived above a convenience store, and the security cameras caught the entire event. As John was walking out, it looked like an invisible man was pulling his hand until he was in a specific spot, and then the old high school bully just stood there without moving. A few seconds later, a car hits a fire hydrant on the other side of the street, and the water pressure somehow sends the hydrant right into John's skull, crushing it against the wall. Apparently, the driver had fallen asleep when he hit the fire hydrant. I looked at the open jar on my desk and wondered if it was possible that it had anything to do with it. I went on with my day with that thought on the back of my head. No, it couldn't be possible, I thought, because souls may or may not exist, and if they do, it wouldn't make sense that you can trap them in a bottle. But still, through the day, I started wondering, what if it did? And I started worrying. Did I unleash some powerful spirit on my enemies? I hated them, and in any other circumstances I would have been, well, not happy, but kind of indifferent to hear that they had died. But I couldn't really bear that they would have died because of me. Even if there was no link going back to me, especially since they still lived in Missouri, I couldn't get out of my head that this was maybe my fault and the guilt was consuming me. At the end of my workday, I decided to do something that I thought I would never do, and I found Dave's parents' contact information because I needed to know if he was still alive for my sake. This was so awkward that I spent several minutes writing down a little speech where I would present myself as a high school acquaintance of his, who wanted to know what he had been up to these days. I called and his mother picked up, and as I was stumbling on my words, she started to cry. "Dave's been admitted to the hospital this morning, on floor 14. I knew what she was talking about. Floor 14 is the psych ward of our high school town's closest hospital. She told me that he woke up completely delusional the day before. His speech made no sense at all. When he got to the kitchen and saw the jam, he completely freaked out and threw the jar on the ground, grabbed a piece of broken glass, and started slicing his veins open. His girlfriend, with whom he lived, called 911, and he had to be tranquilized to be brought to the hospital. She also called his parents. So far, he had been diagnosed with a very sudden and very extreme psychosis. It had only been 1 day, but doctors could already tell that he was not responding very well to drugs. I was floored when I hung up. Out of my 2 bullies, one was dead and the other had gone crazy. A few days after I myself heard a voice that promised to fuck them up, seemingly from a bottle that I got from a crazy drugged man. I grabbed the bottle and didn't know what to make of it. Last night, I had a dream. I saw a silhouette that told me that he had filled his part of the agreement, but he found that he was still bound to the jar and couldn't pass. The silhouette asked me, with barely discernible impatience, when I planned to fulfill my part of the agreement. Number 2. John from Craigslist by nikhilnochill. Read by Kingspook.
I'll start by saying that I had never used Craigslist until about 1 month ago. That might be weird for some of you, but to be honest, I had never felt the need to buy something from someone else when I could just get it at a store. Because of this, I never really understood how sketchy the website could be sometimes until a recent incident. I wouldn't consider myself to be a nerdy guy. However, one thing that I have had a fondness for since I was a child is remote-controlled aircraft. To me, RC vehicles are simply amazing and really fascinating. Some time back, I had purchased a $150 Blue Angel 64mm EDF RTF jet with some money I had saved up. This baby has a 686mm wingspan, 4 channels, and was ready to fly as soon as I got it. But it didn't take long for a dedicated enthusiast like me to notice a problem with the aircraft. Upon a quick inspection, I found that the receiver was fucking fried. I angrily called up the hobby store that I frequent, ready to explain my grievances. To my surprise, they told me that I couldn't get a refund and that a new receiver for my model would cost $45, assuming that all the other components worked fine. I demanded to know why the circuitry in my brand new plane was defective, but the person on the phone just told me to stop by later if I wanted their overpriced garbage. But I wasn't having any of that shit, so I ended the call and took to Craigslist for a new receiver for the Blue Angel. To my surprise, I found exactly what I was looking for right away. Looking back, I probably should have been at least a bit suspicious. What are the odds that the item I desperately needed was right on the front page? But, of course, I just chalked it up to good fortune and contacted the seller right away. Let's call him John. John sounded quite normal over the phone and was pretty enthusiastic about doing some business with me. We agreed to meet up 3 days later in a park that's located about 35 minutes from either of us. When the day finally came, I was pretty excited. The thought of flying my new aircraft was, to say the least, tantalizing. At work, all I could think about was getting the receiver and flying my aircraft. The seller and I were scheduled to meet at 6:45 p.m. that day, so I left my house at around 6. Right as I was about to leave, I got a call from John. There was going to be a change of plans, he said, and we would have to meet outside of a convenience store. This struck me as a bit odd, but I went along with it anyways. By the time I got there, it was already 7:15. I was ready to apologize to John, but he was nowhere to be seen. He's probably late too, I thought to myself. At least I'm not the one who's going to be embarrassed. As I waited outside the convenience store, it started to get a little cold and the sun began to disappear. I decided to get into my car and wait in the parking lot instead. I listened to some music for a while and I must have dozed off because when I came to my senses, it was almost 9:30. Shit. I looked at my phone to find one missed call from John. I called his number back and nervously waited for him to pick up. As soon as he answered, I apologized profusely for my laziness and lack of awareness. I waited for him to respond, but no answer came. Weird. Without warning, he ended the call. Confused and a little unnerved, I decided to wait a bit for him to call me back. While I was waiting, I noticed that the parking lot was completely empty. The convenience store was still open, and I could see a guy in his 20s at the cashier's desk. Across the street, there was a large Art Man furniture store. It looked like it had been closed for at least 6 months or so. The inside was obviously empty of furniture, and the paint on the building was beginning to peel. Most of the front was made of large glass panes so that it would catch the eye of a passerby. I waited for at least 20 minutes, but I didn't get any calls. I decided to call John one more time. He picked up this time, and I wasn't met with silence. He told me he was running late and that he was really sorry about the whole thing. He even offered to reduce the price of the receiver for my troubles. Relieved, I told him not to worry and that I would be waiting for him at the convenience store. He thanked me and hung up. He seemed a little off throughout the conversation, but I brushed it off as nothing. I was about to settle in for a little longer when a realization hit me. I had been using my work phone to call John this entire time. How the fuck did this guy get my work phone number? I thought back to earlier when I was about to leave my house. John had called me to let me know that he couldn't meet me at the park. With an overwhelming sense of dread, I realized he'd called my home landline number. I had absolutely no fucking clue how he contacted me through those numbers. I guess he could have used a phone book to call my landline, but why would that be necessary? Another thing that scared me was that my landline rang as soon as I walked past it. It was almost as if he knew where I was in my house when he called. My first thought was to drive home and call the police, but what would I tell them? That some guy called to let me know he was running late? And besides, I felt like that was exactly what this guy wanted me to do. So instead, I got out of my car and walked into the convenience store. I must have entered pretty fast because the cashier jumped when I came through the door. I apologized under my breath and headed straight for the bathrooms. Each passing second heightened my paranoia. I glanced at my phone. 10:49 p.m. Why the fuck was this man taking so long? Why did he have to be so cryptic? It dawned on me that I should have questioned why he wanted to change locations, but there was nothing I could do now. I splashed some cold water on my face and exited the restroom. The cashier looked at me with disbelief when I walked past him. His face was pale and clammy, and his movements were sporadic. "Something wrong?" I asked. "Dude, I just saw you get inside your car. How did you get in here?" he replied. We both looked at each other and both realized the same thing. He started to freak out and hyperventilate. "I think someone's after me," I told him. "Quick, call the police. Call them now." "Fuck, man. Should we call the police? We need to call the police." "Yeah, I'm gonna call 911. This is crazy," he said, half shouting. He picked up the phone and dialed the emergency number when the lights flickered off. Pale orange illuminated the walls and ceilings as the emergency lights activated. The power was out. The cashier crumpled into the fetal position, muttering to himself. Poor guy must be having a panic attack, I thought. I was convinced that this Craigslist guy was a psycho. Crouching down, I made my way through the aisles until I found one of those small knives used for camping. I needed a way to protect myself in case John decided to make a move. The blade was 4 inches, so I knew it could be used for self-defense to some extent. Taking cover behind a shelf of magazines, I slow-peered out of the convenience store window, hoping to catch a glimpse of John in my car. He was nowhere to be seen. Okay, what's my next move? I thought. Right, call the police with my own phone. I dialed 911 and got in touch with the operator. I explained mostly everything and gave her my location. I begged her to send the police as quickly as possible. The cops would be there in 10 minutes or less. I crawled over to the cashier, who was delirious. He was mumbling gibberish, and his eyes were darting left and right. I couldn't blame him. I was scared as hell too. But it seemed like he was trying to tell me something. Somehow, through his incoherent babble, I could make out the words Art Van and Saw Him. I snuck a peek at the furniture store across the street. John must have been watching me from there, I realized. When he saw the cashier pick up the phone, he somehow cut the power. How long had this man been stalking me, watching my every move? I looked over at the cashier again and saw him lying on his back, eyes closed. I checked his pulse, which was much too fast. John must have poisoned this guy somehow, I realized. He had set me up from the beginning. He anticipated every action I had made so far. But I was going to change that. Whatever twisted plan he had for me was going to be foiled. It was either his life or mine, and I definitely planned on staying alive. For the next 15 minutes or so, I inspected the convenience store and made a mental note of every entrance or exit. My goal was to hold this psychopath off until the police arrived. Somehow, he was able to evade my vision, but I sensed danger. He was there, and I was sure of it. I started to get anxious. Where were the police, I wondered? Had John somehow redirected them somewhere else? I still had no clue what this man was capable of, and I didn't want to find out. My heart was beating harder than ever before. My breathing became heavy and ragged. Is John just waiting me out? He must be trying to mentally break me. It was working, because I was on the verge of breaking down. I forced myself to be as silent as possible. Using every ounce of self-control, I listened for any sound, anything that would reveal John's location to me. Then I heard a car pull up. My first reaction was to lift my head and look out the window, but I stopped myself. It's a fucking trick. John wants me to think that the cops arrived, that my nightmare was somehow over. This is where he will fail, I thought. I crawled over to the door and positioned myself so that if he walked through, I could end him. He had lured me here, attempted to cut me off from authorities, and probably killed the cashier. He wanted to kill me, and he had the full advantage so far. But he wouldn't expect this. John was done for. I waited by the door for what felt like an eternity. I heard the faint sound of shoes against pavement get louder and louder. This was it. It's all about to go down. The door swung open, and with lightning speed, I swung the blunt end of the knife handle into the side of his head. I heard John scream, but after 3 more blows, he was out. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw red and blue flashing lights. 2 county police cars pulled into the parking lot, and the officers stepped out. It was finally over. I made it through alive. I dropped the knife and stood up. I waited for the officers to enter the convenience store. Calmly, I let them arrest me, knowing that I had evidence and even a witness to prove that this man had tried to kill me. The lights had come back on, and I saw the scene clearly for the first time. The man I had almost killed was not John. He was the owner of this convenience store, and he had decided to come in for a surprise inspection, I later learned, but had no clue what was waiting for him. But that wasn't all. The cashier, according to the police, was under the influence of 4 different hallucinogens and depressants. They found acid tabs in his pocket and weed under the desk. He had been high since I first walked through the doors. Suddenly, his strange behavior made sense. His sweating and erratic movements were the result of his drug use. The cashier almost overdosed and was close to death by the time the police arrived. John didn't poison him. This meant that everything he had told me was false. John never entered my car. John was never inside the art van across the street. John was never even here. I still didn't understand how John had found my work phone number and house phone number, but the answer was right on my Craigslist profile. I had listed all my phone numbers in case my normal cell phone was dead or lost. How could I just forget something like that? How? When John called my landline, I coincidentally happened to be walking by. When I called John to let him know I was running late, he'd accidentally put his phone on mute. That meant he could hear me, but I couldn't hear him. When I called him a second time, he had just gotten out of a minor fender bender. Unfortunately, the person who John rear-ended was a real dick and made things pretty difficult for him. By the time John had everything sorted out, it was late. When the druggy cashier was about to call the police, the power went out. This was another crazy coincidence. It turns out, this particular convenience store experiences power outages 2 to 3 times a week. There was an insect infestation in the main fuse box, they discovered. The cashier, being high out of his mind, collapsed due to the sudden change in brightness of his surroundings. And of course, this just fueled my paranoia even further. And finally, John was never going to meet me at that convenience store. I drove to the wrong location. John was actually planning to meet me at a convenience store 14 miles from the one I was at. In my giddy anticipation and excitement, I had taken the wrong highway exit. John would have called me to check where I was, but his phone had died. We were going to meet at a park, as you might recall, but the park had been closed due to reports of aggressive animals in the premises. John never meant me any harm. He was an RC aircraft enthusiast like me. Looking back, I created most of my fears on my own. Now, I face assault and attempted murder charges. I'll probably spend a few years in prison, according to my lawyer, if I go to prison at all. More likely, I'll be visiting a mental rehabilitation center for the next several years of my life. If you should take anything away from all of this, it's this. Be careful on Craigslist.
Number 3. Don't buy things from Craigslist in the middle of the night in nowhere by OH1830L. Read by Mortis Media.
My story starts in 2014. I've had cash tucked away for a while to upgrade to a desktop. At the time, I had a Samsung notebook which was tiny, with a crappy Intel Atom processor and barely 2 GB of RAM. It was okay for light use such as office work and internet shopping, but gaming was out of the question. And as a gamer, I would jump for the chance to game on a PC with mods and games and crap. Anyway, I'm on Craigslist looking for a desktop computer in my region late at night. I was scrolling down the page looking for a desktop that had Windows 7 on it, 4 GB of RAM and a decent CPU. I then came across a listing. This PC had 8 GB of RAM, Core i5 processor and a Gigabyte 710 GT, which was a really good graphics card at the time. Asking price? $120, which seemed like a damn good steal to me. So I logged into my account to get the seller's number for his listing page. I had a crummy old Nokia, but it still worked and dialed the numbers to get to the seller. The phone began to ring, and 15 seconds later of waiting for the seller to pick up, he finally answers.
Yes?
He says. His voice seemed old. Oh hi, my name's Terry, and I'm calling you about the listing of your desktop on Craigslist. The one with the 8 GB of RAM and the 710 graphics card.
Oh, you're calling about that? Well, my friend, you're the first caller I've had. It's still here and waiting, and I'm free all night, so you can come back it up now.
Where are you located? I asked the seller.
I'm located at 1234 Dickham Road.
So I quickly looked up the address, and 1234 Dickham Road was in the middle of nowhere. Is it okay if I pick it up in the morning? I have a few things on my hands at the moment for the evening and won't be able to make it tonight.
I work during the day, but I'm home at the late hours of the night. It may be pretty hard for you to pick it up during the day. But listen, I'll stick the desktop out on the front of my porch. Just slide the money under the door whenever you arrive.
Something seemed really sus about this. It was either go with my gut and stay safe at home and find another listing, or ignore my gut and go pick it up now. At this point you can likely tell I ignored my gut and said, okay, well I suppose I can squeeze in some time and pick it up now. I'll be over in 20 minutes.
Alrighty, see you real soon, friend.
Friend? Why would someone call me friend even though they don't know who I am? Whatever, time to go pick up this beast. I jump in my car and set my GPS for 1234 Dickham Road. I arrive at the seller's place about 20 minutes later. His house looked like one of those houses you would see in rural areas of Australia. The ones with the tin roof and made out of wood or something. Anyway, the porch lights were off, which was strange. He didn't mention about them being on or off, but it would have helped if he had had them on so that I could see. I walk up to his creaky porch and put my hand around to try and feel a rectangular shaped object. But there's nothing. Nothing at all. Perhaps he had second thoughts on where he should put the desktop. Maybe it's inside, I thought. So I knock on the door. There's no answer, and the lights inside his home are all off. I bring up my contacts list on my phone and go to recently dialed and ring the guy. The line rings for about 30 seconds and then says that the number you have been trying to call has been disconnected.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.
God damn. I'm in the middle of nowhere at some seller's place trying to look for a desktop I'm trying to purchase, and I can't find it if the seller's phone has been disconnected already. 10 seconds after getting off my phone, I hear something. Bang! Shit. What was that? I said to myself. I think it came from the back. My guts were telling me to run at this point. Bang! There it goes again. This time I'm spooked out and run for my car, hands shaking as I try and open my door and start the engine. I started it whilst my hands were shaking, and I haul us out of there. 3 minutes up the road, I get a message on my phone for a private number that said,
"See you real soon, friend. I have a feeling I'll be seeing you again real soon."
I got home and I was still shaking. Of course, I was without a desktop. But still, at this point, my life is worth more than a computer. I go to bed and go to sleep. It took a while to relax my mind, but I eventually fell asleep and had a dream. I was back at the seller's place again in my dream. And this time I didn't have my car and it was late night as usual. I'm out the front of his place and hear a bang! The sound is coming from the back. I go round the back to see what's happening and to see if the seller was out back doing something. I couldn't see well, but I think his back door was shut. But someone was definitely over in the distance, just standing there, not moving. I feel the hair on my neck wanting to fly up at this point. Whatever was in the distance said,
"Had you stayed, friend, I would have knifed and stabbed you to hell."
That's all it said, and then it just vanished. The dream was really weird, but by the time I woke up in the morning, I got onto my laptop and checked my history. Craigslist said the URL is broken or has been typed in wrong, and the seller's profile no longer exists. I needed to get my mind off things, and I could only do it at this point by going back to 1234 Dickham Road to see what the hell the seller was trying to pull. Back in the car I go and off to the same road in daylight. Even though it's still in the middle of nowhere, I feel less spooked in the day than what I do at night when I'm in the middle of nowhere. I pull up to the road sometime later, and the house looks like someone took a bulldozer or something through the house, because it looks collapsed and crushed. I was only there last night. How could it have been crushed already? I may never know the answer, but hopefully whatever caused the house to collapse had a good reason to do it. Let this be a warning to you all. Never venture into places in the middle of nowhere late at night to pick something up. And if you still want to do it, take a few friends and pack some weapons in the car. You just never know what shit you might face while picking something up in the middle of nowhere.
And number 4. I bought a haunted piano on Craigslist. By Christopher Maxim. Read by Shivers.
So, I'm a musician, not one of grave importance or even outstanding ability. Still, I consider myself a musician. I can play with the best of them and I know my way around an instrument or two. Most importantly, however, I'm a collector. A collector of various items ranging from the odd to the obscure. There is no rhyme or reason for my collection. It consists of anything that piques my interest or that I can get my hands on. That is why when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a vintage, rustic red piano, I couldn't help but reach out to the seller. The ad's title seemed normal enough. Old piano, free to a good home. I'd seen countless ads like this before. It was nothing out of the ordinary, and certainly nothing that would grab my attention. Still, I felt the need to click on it. Maybe I was bored, or maybe I just liked the idea of not having to pay for a potential addition to my collection. Either way, I gave in to my compulsion. Upon clicking on the ad, I was greeted with an anonymous and intriguing story. It read something like this. I am offering my piano to anyone who is willing to come and pick it up. It is very old, but still playable. I can prove this upon your arrival. It is red and bears no brand markings. This is because it was made by my great-grandfather. This instrument is one of a kind. He went out himself and chopped down a redwood tree to provide the wood to build it. It took him many days to finally cut down the tree, and much longer to finish making the piano. Nearly his entire life was put into this thing. I, however, have no use for it. It has been passed down in my family many times over, but I have no wish to continue this tradition. And the piano is currently taking up too much space in my home. I want it gone as quickly as possible. My name is Margaret, and you can reach me by phone at the number listed below. Serious inquiries only. Reading the ad sparked my curiosity. One of a kind, redwood tree? How strange and absurd. I had to see this thing. If it was half as remarkable as Margaret's description made it out to be, then it was a must-have for my ever-growing collection. As such, I decided to give her a call. Margaret answered the phone after the first ring, and immediately asked if it was about the piano. Although I found this to be an odd greeting, I assured her that it was indeed why I had called. She seemed rather enthused, but I shared her enthusiasm, happy to know the piano was still available. We set up a time the following day when I could come over and take a look at it. I hung up the phone excited and bewildered. I had a feeling that this piano could very well be the centerpiece of my oddities. My collection spans many eras of history, as well as numerous centuries. They range anywhere from the mundane to the wildly strange, but all of them are nothing if not great conversation pieces. Some of my favorites include a genuine voodoo doll from Louisiana, a tooth from a saber-toothed cat, a book of spells written by an alleged witch, a piece of antler from the world's largest moose. Being a musician, I also own countless instruments, too many to name. Each time I acquire a new item, my heart would race with excitement with whatever it was I was receiving becoming the main focus of my attention. This piano was no exception. I could not wait to see it in person. I woke up the following day with no resistance to my alarm. I was more than eager to start my day and head off towards a new potential addition for my collection. I swiftly went about my daily routine in an effort to minimize the time between me and Margaret. She said that she was an early bird and that I can stop by any time. With this in mind, I showered, brushed my teeth, got dressed, and ate breakfast at a record pace, making it out the door roughly 25 minutes after waking up. It might sound a bit silly to get this worked up over a material object, but to this I'd say you must not be a collector. This piano was my mission, and it was one I intended to see through until the end. I found myself at Margaret's house while it was still morning, as she was just 2 towns over from where I lived. It was a quaint cottage at the end of a dead-end road, surrounded by shrubbery and woods. I noticed an old tire swing in the backyard, indicating that it may have been the house that she lived in as a child. Maybe her parents passed away and left her the house. Maybe the piano reminded her of them, and that was the real reason she was getting rid of it. My speculation was interrupted by a woman who came running out of the cottage to greet me. She signaled for me to come inside and went back in herself. This was no doubt Margaret. I never told her what kind of car to be in, but I assumed not many people come out here in the middle of nowhere and park in front of your house. So I got out of my car and made my way up the stone walkway to the front door. In entering the house, Margaret seemed overjoyed to see me. It was something adjacent to seeing a relative for the first time in a great while. It was odd, but refreshing. It certainly made things less awkward. We exchanged a few pleasantries before she rushed me over to the room that contained the piano. I could tell that she was excited to show me it, just as excited as I was to actually see it. I matched her pace as we made our way to the room. Upon entering the room, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, just a few yards away, was the piano in all its glory. It was a beautiful concoction of wood and ivory, the likes of which I'd never seen before. It had such a striking red color, giving it an illustrious and bold finish. And the design, it was magnificent. Simple, yet magnificent. Highly original, and certainly one of a kind, just like Margaret had said in her ad. I stood there in awe with my mouth open. Margaret must have thought I didn't like it, because she quickly started going off on a sales pitch about its charm and history. She then went on to sit at the stool in front of it and placed her hands over the keys. I tuned it yesterday after your call. Let's see how it sounds, Margaret said. Margaret began playing a beautiful piece. Not only did she play, but she sang as well. This is when I took my attention away from the piano and allowed myself to notice her. She was a young woman, maybe in her late 20s. Very beautiful, very slender. She had silver highlights in her hair, giving it a strange, albeit lovely luster. Her singing voice, accompanied by the wonderfully rich tone of the piano, captivated me in a way that I cannot describe. It surprised me to know that she not only played, but could also tune the piano. Her ad made it seem like she wasn't musically inclined at all. I allowed myself to be taken by the song until she finished. Before I could compliment Margaret on her playing, she quickly began talking, continuing her well-rehearsed sales pitch. I don't know if it was her playing or her voice, but I was sold the minute she touched the keys. Because of this, I interrupted her. "I'll take it." She seemed astounded when I said this. "Really? You will? Wonderful," she said. We were both happy and everything seemed fine, but one fact kept creeping and crawling in the back of my mind. I wasn't sold on the piano's backstory just yet, so I decided to ask her about it. Keep in mind that Margaret and I live in the Midwest. "So, have you lived in this house your whole life?" I asked, secretly fishing for information. "Yes, as did my parents. This house is very old. Older than the piano," she said. "And your great-grandfather, he lived here as well?" I kept bombarding her with questions. "Yes, he did," she said. "Well, redwoods only grow in California, so your great-grandfather traveled all the way out there to chop down a tree to make a piano and brought it all the way back here?" It was at this point that Margaret realized I'd caught her in a lie. She apologized to me and explained the truth behind the piano. It would seem that her great-grandfather actually did go out and chop down a red tree to make the piano, just like she said. But it was not a redwood. It happened to be a tree that was located near where we both lived, deep in a nearby forest. Being an avid historian, Margaret's great-great-grandfather had known about this tree for a while. It was a local legend of sorts, and it had always been his dream to find it. Locals deemed it the blood tree. It was a sacred tree worshipped by a Native American tribe many years ago. Anyone who finds the tree is said to live a long life filled with luck and prosperity. Those who vandalize it, however, will forever live a life of fear and misfortune. Her great-grandfather, of course, fell into the latter category. Though she claimed not to believe in the legend, she did point out that he did die of a heart attack shortly after finishing the piano. Margaret's story was wild and entertaining. Even so, I believed her. It seemed that her ancestor finally found the tree that he'd been searching for and wanted to take a piece of it home as a trophy. A piano was a fitting choice, seeing as this seemed to be a family of musicians. As for the curse, I was not concerned one bit. Perhaps Margaret was scared despite her disbelief, and that's why she wanted to give me the piano. Either way, I'm a skeptic at heart, so it's a win-win situation in my eyes. I gladly accepted the gift, dark past or not. Despite Margaret's lie and the piano being free, I attempted to offer her money, but she wouldn't have it. She insisted on me just taking the thing off her hands. That would have been fine, but just taking such a beautiful instrument from someone would have not sat well with me. It wasn't much, but I slipped an envelope containing $100 into her mailbox on my way out. After calling over a friend to help me lift the heavy piano into the bed of my truck, I took off from Margaret's house with my new collectible. I made it home with ease, and with the help of that same friend, I positioned the piano in a lovely spot in my living room. I had a new piece for my collection, and I was happy. All was right in the world. Or so I thought. For a few days, my life continued as it normally did. My routine remained unchanged. The only difference was the new piece of furniture in my house, the new centerpiece of my lovely collection of strange objects. After a while, I barely noticed it was there. Despite its beauty, it blended in with the rest of my home, much like the other items in my collection. On the third night after receiving the piano, however, something weird happened. Something most certainly out of the ordinary. I had just laid down to sleep and placed myself in a comfortable position on my bed. As soon as my eyes were shut, I started drifting off into a light sleep. I had been exhausted from a long day at work. To my dismay, a loud bang came from downstairs and jolted me awake. I jumped up out of bed and took a moment to process the sound. I realized quickly that it sounded like the piano's fallboard slamming shut over the keys. That could have easily happened on its own, had I left it open. But I hadn't played the piano even once since I procured it, so how could the fallboard slam shut if it was never open to begin with? I raced downstairs in an effort to satisfy my curiosity and put my mind at ease. What I found did neither. Upon walking over to the piano, I noticed that the fallboard was up. Not only did it not slam shut over the keys, but it somehow opened on its own. No way. There was just no way that was even possible. I discarded the nonsense that was swimming around my overly tired mind and chalked up the sound to being that of one of my neighbors. I also must have opened the fallboard when moving the piano and never closed it. That was the only explanation. I closed the fallboard over the keys and went back upstairs to bed. I ended up sleeping for the rest of the night. The next day was pretty normal for me. I woke up early, took a shower, brushed my teeth, and ate breakfast. I went to work and dealt with the stress that came along with it, just as I always did. The piano was the farthest thing from my mind. It wasn't until I got home that day that it made its way back in. I opened the door to my house and immediately felt a cold gust rush from within. This was strange as I didn't leave the AC on, and it wasn't a particularly eventful day as far as weather goes. Brushing this off, I walked into the living room and set my jacket on the couch. I then looked up and noticed the piano. The fallboard. It was up. That couldn't be. I knew that I closed it the night before when getting up to inspect that strange sound. I absolutely knew it. This got me thinking, was someone in my house? I sped around my house at full speed with a kitchen knife in hand, ready to attack an intruder if there was one. I raced up and down the stairs, covering every inch of the house. I checked and rechecked every room, making sure I was completely alone. And as it turned out, I was. Eventually, I found myself back in the living room, in front of the piano. I looked at it once more, noticed that the fallboard was down. Was I going mad? No. I was just experiencing the side effects of a long day at work, nothing more. I must have just thought that the fallboard was up when I came home. That's all. At least that's what I told myself to keep from dwelling on the situation. Still frazzled from the stressful day I'd had, I'd made my way to my bedroom and attempted to catch some shut-eye. I changed out of my work attire and into my nightwear, then plopped down on my warm and comfortable bed. A good end to a bad day, I thought. As luck would have it, I wouldn't be getting any sleep just yet. Quickly after shutting my eyes, I heard another sound coming from downstairs. This time, it wasn't a loud bang. No, not at all. This time, it was music. Not just any music either. It was the piano. How could this be? Was somebody really in my house this time? Or could it be? Was the piano playing itself? Neither option sat well with me. With nothing but adrenaline to guide me, I ran downstairs at full speed to catch a culprit of these late night antics. Upon doing so, the music stopped and I actually watched the fallboard slam itself shut over the keys. My heart sank and I stood in place at the bottom of the stairs. Completely and utterly in shock. After a few more moments of being a statue, I raced back up to my room and locked the door behind me. In a nervous slur of movement, I ran over to my bed and leaped onto it, unable to comprehend what I just witnessed. I sat there contemplating. All the while, a vile mixture of fear and confusion brewed in the pit of my stomach. What the hell was going on? Eventually, the fear and confusion subsided, allowing melatonin to take over and do its job. I fell asleep and managed to stay that way until the next morning. I woke up to the sound of my alarm clock early the next day. I sat in bed for a few moments and wondering if the events from the previous night were nothing more than a dream. No, I knew that wasn't the case, but I gave in to the notion anyhow. Living in a state of denial was better than living in a world where I was going insane. I was so good at indulging in this falsehood that I actually managed to convince myself that it really was a dream, or at least the product of an overactive imagination. It was a splendid defense mechanism. and one that allowed me to go about my day without fear or unease. I left, went to work, came home, and went back to bed. Everything was back to normal, just because I told myself it was. But lies only stretch so far. Eventually the truth catches up with you, when you least expect it. As I laid there in bed, ready to sleep through the night, I heard the piano once more. I jumped out of bed rather abruptly and assessed the situation. What the hell was happening here? Was I truly going insane? If not, was this instrument really playing itself? Was there really an underlying layer of this world governed by laws of the supernatural, allowing this piano to be haunted in some way? I thought about it for a few moments as the song went on, and then it hit me. This wasn't paranormal. No, it couldn't be. This was a cheap parlor trick. Margaret created quite the jest. She outfitted the piano to play itself, much like the player pianos they had in the saloons way back when. This was just a prank, a laugh at my expense. That's why the damn thing was free. I ran downstairs to solve the mystery once and for all. Of course, as soon as I hit the bottom step, the piano stopped playing. I walked over to it calmly, confident in my new theory. I opened the thing up and looked inside, begging the piano to divulge in its inner workings to me. It did, but I was surprised by the result. This was just a normal piano. Nothing extra was added in its creation to make it play on its own. Nothing at all. Stunned by this new revelation, I stepped back from the piano. My calm demeanor was no more. I stared at the redwood and ivory keys before me and almost felt compelled to ask, "What are you?" Instead, I remained silent. This silence, however, was quickly obliterated by the sound of the music of the piano starting to play itself once again. I wanted to run, but the terror kept me still. I watched as a horror unfolded in front of me. The keys were being pressed down harder than before, by some unseen force. The piece was also being played at a faster tempo. As if that wasn't enough, picture frames began falling off the walls. It felt as though my house was shaking. A lamp in the corner fell over, bringing my attention to that side of the room. That's when I saw it. Standing right outside my living room window was a dark figure. I couldn't make out any of the features on it. The moonlight wasn't enough to reveal this living silhouette's identity. I'd had enough. I gained some composure and ran back up to my bedroom. I locked the door behind me and climbed back into bed. All the while, the song raged on. The house continued to shake. The dark figure, for all I know, it could have made its way into the house. Knowing this, my heart and thoughts raced at an equal rate. I was beginning to believe that I was neither crazy, nor did Margaret rig the piano to play on its own. This was something entirely different. Something not of this world. Just as I came to this realization, the music stopped, and so did the shaking. With nothing left to do, I slept. It was no easy task, but fear has to taper off at some point, and it eventually did, allowing me to escape the madness of my world and enter the realm of unconsciousness. I would have been grateful for this, had it not been short-lived. I awoke a few hours later to the house filled to the brim with utter silence. Honestly, it was so silent that I immediately took notice. Normally, I'd at least hear the house creaking, or even the buzz of nature from outside, but none of these sounds were present. I got up and looked out my window for a clue. The world outside my room was still. No wind, no cars, no animals, and no people. Nothing. It was peculiar. Sure, it was the middle of the night, but where were the crickets chirping, the frogs croaking, and the trees swaying? Where was the life outside my home? For the matter of fact, where was the life within it? I seemed to be the only moving facet in this eerily frozen world. I hesitantly ventured downstairs for any further indication as to why everything seemed to be suspended in time. As I reached the bottom step, I looked over at the piano. There was something off about it. I walked over to it and realized that a few of the keys were pressed down. I attempted to touch them, but they would not budge. In pressing the other keys, I realized that none of them would budge at all. Unsettling? Yes, but not so much compared to what I saw to the left of the piano. It was so dark I almost didn't see it. Standing completely still next to the piano was that dark figure. When I noticed it, I jumped and let out an awkward and fearful grunt of sorts. The figure did not react. It was as if it was inanimate along with the rest of the world. I decided to use this opportunity to my advantage. I crept over to the figure to get a better look at it. I noticed that it was wearing some sort of dark cloak, one that covered its entire body. In the face of the shroud, I saw nothing but pure darkness. I cautiously attempted to pull the hood off its head, but much like the piano keys, it would not budge. I stood there staring at the figure for a few more seconds before a familiar sound filled the room. The piano started playing again, and in an instant the world came to life. I could hear with it the sounds of my house, as well as those of the outside world. I also noticed that the figure in front of me had a swirling aura of energy surrounding it. It was a pelt of darkness wrapped around the shadowy figure, cloak and all. Before I could even react to its appearance, the dark figure hastily reached out to grab me with a skeletal hand. I fell backwards in fear. Scrambling to get up, I managed to stand upright and make a run for it. I bolted towards the front door, rushed through it, and raced to my car. I got in. I had to hotwire the damn thing because my keys were inside, and then I took off. From that point, I was able to calm down slightly. I had escaped, but at what cost? In a much less frightened state, I began to think logically. Was I just going to abandon my house and all my belongings just because of this spirit? Was I going to quit my job and leave town? No, of course not. Just the idea of this was preposterous. Running away was not an option. Driving in circles around my neighborhood, I weighed my options. I could go back and try to destroy the piano. No, bad idea. That could make the spirit angry, and it might attach itself to me in the process, if it hadn't already. I could tough it out for one more night until I come up with a better course of action. Nope, I didn't like that idea either. And that's when a solid plan came to mind. One I'm surprised I hadn't thought of earlier. I peeled out of my neighborhood in a fury and sped off to my next destination. I was going back to the cellar. Surely she would know what was going on. Perhaps she can even help. At the very least, I could give her a piece of my mind for selling me a possessed piano. Either way, I would feel a little better. The drive was a blur. My mind was in such dire straits that I drove on autopilot the whole way there. In seemingly no time at all, I found myself smack dab in front of Margaret's house, desperate and troubled. I knew it was late, but I didn't care. I had nowhere else to go. I couldn't call the cops, or tell a friend. No one would believe me. And even if they did, what could they do to help? Out of luck and out of options, I walked up the stone path to Margaret's door. Just as I was about to walk up to the door and knock, something happened. My march was impeded. The dark figure from my house appeared directly in front of me, keeping me from reaching Margaret's door. I backed up a bit, confused and frightened. But the figure did not follow. I ran back to my car to make a getaway, but the figure remained at Margaret's door. Perplexed, I walked back up to the stone path. In reaching the figure once again, I examined it. It was still just as it was in my house before springing to life. Keeping that in mind, I treaded lightly. I reached around the figure slowly to knock on the door, but I was stopped. The figure came to life once again and grabbed my arm with its skeletal hand. I tried to run, but it had such a tight grip on me that I couldn't move. Not only this, but I could feel its presence anchoring me to the ground. I can't explain it, but even without its hand, this thing had its hooks on me. I cowered before the figure, and it leaned over to me, almost as if to say,
Leave this place.
It then vanished into thin air, right before my eyes. I gained some composure, ran to my car, and quickly left Margaret's house. I spent the whole ride home thinking about what just happened. It would seem as though the piano would not let me return to Margaret's house. I was its owner, and that's the way it would stay until I gifted it to someone else. The only issue with this theory is that I could not do that to someone, even a complete stranger. The problem was mine to deal with, and mine alone. I would have to discover a different method to ease my woes. I arrived home shortly thereafter, and reluctantly opened the front door to my home. Everything appeared normal for the moment being. I took advantage of this and headed up to my room. I locked the door behind me, not that it would help though, and threw myself into the mess of blankets and pillows that was my bed. The song started up again. I continued to lie down, sick of the repetition. I felt the house shake, but I remained unmoved. It wasn't until the banging on my bedroom door that I started fearing for my life. The banging grew louder, and I jumped out of bed and started pushing my dresser towards the door. A blockade was the only solution I could come up with. After placing the dresser in front of my door, I rushed back to bed, inspecting the door while the banging continued. I realized that both the door and the dresser were moving. It was slight but noticeable. Before I knew it, the dresser toppled over to the floor, spilling its contents as it did. Safety was too much to ask for, it seemed. I covered myself in a blanket, attempting to tune out the ruckus around me. The banging persisted, but I chose to focus instead on the song, and for the first time, I allowed myself to properly listen to it. Upon doing so, I was pleasantly surprised. It was beautiful, dark and sullen, but beautiful. The clash of the ivory keys coupled with the storming melody soothed me. It soothed me to the point that I could no longer hear the banging at my door, or feel the shaking of my house. It's almost weird to say, but I was at peace. Relaxed, I drifted away with the song, seamlessly entering a state of sleep. While in this musical slumber, I dreamt. The dream world I found myself in was different from that of my usual dreamscapes. It was intensely vivid and ambient. Hard to describe, really. Words like surreal and otherworldly just don't cut it. The awareness I had is also difficult to explicate. Lucidity is also too small of a concept. The feeling required more explanation than that. I was completely aware of my surroundings, in a sense that I could feel everything about it. I know that doesn't make much sense, but it's the only description I have to offer. Relying on sight to truly understand where I was, I became aware of the fact that I was in a forest. It was very dense, but I could make out the clearing up ahead. Instead of walking to it, I felt myself floating forward. Knowing it was a dream, I neither questioned this nor tried to fight it. I found that fighting narratives in dreams usually led to an early awakening, and I did not want to wake up to find the dark figure looming over my bed, or anything like that. I eventually reached the clearing. It was some sort of meadow. In its center was a tree, a very large, red tree. All at once, I knew where I was. I could feel it too. This was the blood tree. This was a precursor to my piano, the building blocks of a haunting in the form of a plant. Just as I took in the sight of the tree, a person stepped out from behind it. He walked over to me as I watched. It was a Native American. I'd never seen one in real life, but I could still tell. He didn't look exactly like the ones portrayed in documentaries, but he wasn't all that dissimilar either. He was most certainly a Native American. I was sure of it. He didn't speak. He simply pointed at the tree. This is when the piano began leaking into my dreams. I could hear the song playing from downstairs as glowing lines ran up and down the tree. It was amazing. For lack of a better word, the Native American then walked back over to the tree and put his hand on it. He motioned for me to come over to do the same. Confused and awestruck, I obliged. In placing my hand on the blood tree, I felt it spark. It was a remarkably lifelike feeling, especially considering I was still in a dream. I also felt the glowing lines racing past my skin. It was an incredible sensation. I looked over at my new friend and noticed that his eyes were closed. He was in some sort of trance, bewildered. I decided I should do the same, and so I did. With my eyes shut, I was greeted by visions. Visions of the tree's early life and purpose. They were visions of sight as well as emotion. I could feel everything that these people felt as they worshipped this ancient plant. It was breathtaking. The tree wasn't always red. It used to be of a normal color. The red is none other than blood, but there weren't any sacrifices made there. Nothing like that. Willing Native Americans came up to the tree every year, sliced their hands open, and placed them on the tree. Their blood then dripped down its exterior. The glowing lines must have been the blood of each individual. Lifelines, if you will. These people were celebrating life and trying to become one with nature. This tree was the anchor that kept their community together, that kept their family from falling apart. This is where they would play music, laugh, dance, and enjoy each other's company. This is where they enjoyed life. They were free from judgment and the worries from day-to-day stress. They were at peace at this one spot, at this one tree. My visions eventually led me to the burying of their dead. This too was done at the tree. Every native in this group is buried under the blood tree. One of the elders would then play a song on the small organa-like instrument. I recognized it right away. It was a song that was played on the piano, playing every night. It was their song of death. Abruptly, I snapped out of the trance I was in and found myself back at the tree. My friend was now sitting on the ground next to me, back against the bark. He had the instrument from my vision in his hand and began playing the song of death. I listened intently, but he would not finish. Instead, he handed it to me, motioning for me to play. I hesitantly accepted the invitation. I managed to get the hang of the potato-shaped ocarina rather quickly, as it was a simple instrument. As such, I began playing the song. The strangest thing happened when I did though. The tree began wilting. Its bark changed from red to black and its leaves started falling. I stopped playing, but the Native American motioned with his hands for me to keep going, and so I continued. I kept playing the song and the tree kept wilting. My friend was ecstatic. Somehow, this is what he wanted, but I didn't know why. You know how something in a dream could be so perplexing, and it isn't until you finally wake up that you truly divulge in its meaning? That is exactly what happened here. Before the tree could fully perish, I woke up in my bed at home. I was consumed by an instant revelation. Margaret's grandfather had taken away these people's headstone. More than that, he took away their connection to nature, as well as with one another. The tree and its spirits needed to be put to rest once and for all, and there was only one way to do this. I needed to play the song of their dead on the piano, the whole way through, without interruption. I can't explain how I came to know this. The accumulation of emotions I felt in the dream, joy, tranquility, confusion, and sadness, they all seemed to point me in this direction. I know it doesn't make sense, but it did to me. I got out of bed shortly after coming to this realization and walked over to my bedroom door. There was no banging, no song, no nothing. The world seemed to be frozen, a perfect opportunity to venture downstairs to the piano. I opened the door and walked at a normal pace to my destination, so as not to disrupt anything or break the illusion, so to speak. I calmly made my way to the piano and sat down. I placed my hands on the keys and began playing. I knew the song by heart now, having heard it so many times. Not only that, but the piano itself seemed to be guiding my hands across the keys. As I played, the whole world around me ceased to remain still. The house began shaking violently, knocking frames and furniture all over the place. Still, I continued playing. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a dark figure, standing outside my window. This made me a bit uneasy, but I couldn't stop playing for anything. I knew not the outcome of this nightly adventure, but I knew that I had an obligation to persevere, if not for the tree or its ghosts, then for myself. I needed for this nightmare to end. The dark figure kept disappearing and reappearing at odd locations in the room. Sometimes I'd see it right next to me. Other times I could feel it breathing down my neck. I paid no attention despite my fear. I wouldn't let it ruin my chance to putting this haunting to a rest, not when I'd come so far. Just as the shadowy figure appeared sitting next to me at the piano, and just as I felt the house stop to shake, I hit the final note of the song. How it felt can't be described in words. Cathartic is a good attempt, but nowhere near as elevating as it actually felt. It was like a huge weight was lifted, not only off my shoulders, but off the shoulders of many others too. It was an indescribable experience. Basking in elation, I turned my head and noticed that the dark figure was still sitting next to me. It didn't look the same. However, the swirling vortex of darkness surrounding it was gone. It now seemed to be nothing more than a cloaked man. He slowly reached up and pulled the hood down from his head. As I watched, it was my friend, the Native American from my dream. But how? Before I could bombard the man with any questions I might have had, he looked at me and smiled before vanishing. It has been many months since I was haunted by the piano, and I haven't heard a peep out of it since. It's still sitting in my living room, and I do play it on occasion. It is my best guess that my theory worked. I somehow had a hand in laying the tree as well as many spirits to rest. The ordeal still begs a question though. Who was the cloaked man? Was he some form of death who wanted the souls of countless Native Americans to be put to rest? Or was he a Native American himself, one of the many spirits trying to cross over to the other side.
So, could you guess the creepypasta? I'm sure many of you folks who don't believe in the paranormal will quickly jump on number 1 or number 4. Well, you'd be half right. The hidden creepypasta is number 4. I bought a haunted piano on Craigslist by Christopher Maxim. For more scary stories by this talented writer, definitely visit ChristopherMaximWriter.com or click the link in the description. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe as well if you enjoyed the video. Thanks. And don't forget to subscribe to Kingspook, Shivers, and Mortis Media if you enjoyed their stories. Good night.